Dawn, August, 480 BC. Before the first rays of sunlight reach the cliffs of Thermopylae, more than 1,000 Greek warriors are already awake. Some kneel in silent prayer. Others tighten the leather straps around their bronze armor. A few stare toward the narrow pass ahead, knowing they may never see their homes again. In only a few hours, the greatest empire on Earth will arrive. For more than 2,000 years, the world has remembered this moment as the story of 300 Spartans making a final stand against impossible odds. It is one of history's greatest legends, a story of courage, sacrifice, and defiance. But legends have a way of simplifying the truth. The Spartans were real. King Leonidas was real. The battle happened exactly where history says it did. Yet the famous number, 300, has overshadowed thousands of other Greeks who stood beside them, fought beside them, and in many cases, died beside them. This is not the story of replacing one legend with another. It is the story of completing it. Tonight we travel back to the summer of 480 BC to uncover what truly happened at Thermopylae, and why the full story is even more extraordinary than the myth that survived. Long before a single spear was raised at Thermopylae, another story was unfolding far to the east. The Persian Empire stretched across 3 continents. From the valleys of Egypt to the mountains of modern-day Iran, from the shores of Asia Minor to the borders of India, it ruled over millions of people, hundreds of cultures, and vast wealth. It was the largest empire the world had ever seen. Its ruler, Xerxes I, inherited not just a throne, but an ambition to bring the independent Greek city-states under Persian rule and avenge the defeat his father, Darius I, had suffered at Marathon 10 years earlier. Preparing for the campaign took years. Roads were repaired, supplies were gathered, engineers built floating bridges across the Hellespont so an entire army could cross from Asia into Europe. A massive fleet sailed alongside the advancing land forces, ensuring that Persia's strength could strike from both land and sea. Ancient writers claimed Xerxes commanded millions of soldiers. Modern historians consider those numbers impossible, estimating somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 troops. Even at the lower estimate, it was an overwhelming force for its time. As villages across northern Greece watched endless columns of soldiers disappear beyond the horizon, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was no ordinary invasion. It was the greatest military challenge Greece had ever faced. If Persia was an empire, Greece was anything but. There was no single Greek king, no united government, no standing national army. Instead, the land was divided among dozens of fiercely independent city-states. Athens ruled the seas with its growing navy. Sparta dominated the battlefield through discipline and military tradition. Corinth prospered through trade. Thebes pursued its own ambitions. More often than not, these cities viewed one another as rivals rather than allies. For generations, they had argued over territory, influence, and power. Alliances shifted constantly, and yesterday's ally could become tomorrow's enemy. The idea that these independent states would stand together against a foreign invader seemed almost impossible. Yet as Xerxes' army crossed into Europe, old rivalries suddenly appeared insignificant. One by one, envoys traveled between the cities. Arguments gave way to uneasy negotiations. Pride had to be swallowed. If Greece remained divided, each city would almost certainly fall alone. From these difficult discussions emerged an unprecedented alliance known today as the Hellenic League. It was fragile, imperfect, and filled with distrust. But it was enough. For perhaps the first time, many of the Greek city-states agreed that survival depended on cooperation. Among those called to lead this alliance was Leonidas, one of Sparta's 2 reigning kings. Unlike the legendary image that later iterations would create, Leonidas was not a mythical hero. He was a seasoned commander shaped by Sparta's demanding way of life. From hillhood, Spartan boys endured the agoge, a relentless system of military education that emphasized discipline, endurance, and loyalty above comfort. Courage was admired, but obedience to the city came first. When news of the Persian invasion reached Sparta, Leonidas faced an impossible dilemma. A major religious festival, the Carneia, was underway, and Spartan law forbade the full army from marching until its sacred observances had ended. Waiting, however, could allow Xerxes to sweep through Greece before meaningful resistance could form. Leonidas chose a compromise that history would remember forever. He assembled just 300 Spartan hoplites, not because they were the only soldiers Sparta possessed, but because they could move immediately. Ancient sources suggest that each man had a living son, ensuring that his family line would continue if he never returned. It was not simply a military expedition. It may have been a mission from which Leonidas expected none of them to come home. As the small Spartan force marched north, they were joined by soldiers from cities across Greece. They came not as subjects of Sparta, but as allies answering a common call. Together they advanced toward a narrow coastal pass called Thermopylae, a place where geography might succeed, where numbers could not. Thermopylae was not chosen by chance. It was chosen because it offered the only advantage the Greeks possessed, the land itself. In 480 BC, the pass was far narrower than it appears today. On one side rose steep limestone cliffs. On the other lay the waters of the Malian Gulf. In places, only a few dozen soldiers could fight shoulder to shoulder. No matter how large Xerxes' army was, it could not unleash its full strength here. The Greeks understood this. If they could force the Persians into the narrow corridor, discipline would outweigh numbers. The long spears of the hoplites, locked together behind overlapping shields, could hold back wave after wave of attackers. Nearby, the Allied fleet held position at Artemisium. Together, the sea and the pass formed a single defensive plan. Hold both, and Greece might survive. Leonidas walked the ground carefully. This would not be a battle won through heroic charges. It would be won one step at a time, with every advance purchased in blood. For 4 days, Xerxes waited. He expected fear to drive the Greeks away. Instead, his scouts reported an astonishing sight. The Spartans were calmly combing their long hair before battle. To the Persians, it seemed foolish. To the Spartans, it was tradition. A warrior prepared himself with dignity before facing death. When the order to advance was finally given, thousands of Persian infantry surged into the narrow pass. Bronze struck bronze. Spears shattered. Dust swallowed the battlefield until friend and foe were barely visible. Yet every assault met the same wall of shields. The Greek phalanx held firm. Medes, Scythians, and veteran Persian troops attacked repeatedly, only to be driven back. Frustrated, Xerxes committed his elite guard, the Immortals. Across the empire, they were considered unstoppable. At Thermopylae, they discovered that courage alone could not overcome geography. Unable to surround the Greeks, they too were forced back with heavy losses. As evening fell, the narrow pass still belonged to the Greek alliance. The greatest army of its age had fought from sunrise to sunset and failed to break the line. But beyond the mountains, unseen by either army, events were already unfolding that would change everything. When the sun rose on the second morning, Xerxes expected exhausted defenders. Instead, the Greeks stood exactly where they had the day before, shields locked, spears lowered, silent and unbroken. Fresh Persian formations advanced into the pass. Again, the narrow terrain robbed the empire of its greatest strength. Thousands of soldiers waited behind the front ranks, unable to fight while only a handful could engage at once. The Greek phalanx absorbed each assault and answered with disciplined precision. From his command position, Xerxes watched another day slip away. Ancient writers even describe him rising repeatedly in frustration as attack after attack failed. The greatest army of its age could not force open a single mountain pass. As darkness settled over Thermopylae, confidence spread through the Greek camp. They had held for 2 days. Perhaps the impossible could continue just a little longer. They did not know that fate was already climbing the mountains above them. A local Greek named Ephialtes crossed into the Persian camp under cover of night. Whether driven by greed, ambition, or fear, he revealed a secret route known as the Anopaia Path, a mountain trail leading around the Hot Gates and behind the Greek position. For Xerxes, it was the opportunity he had been searching for. Before midnight, a selected Persian force quietly began the climb. Torches were extinguished. Armor was muffled. Only the sound of boots against stone broke the silence. The Phocian guards stationed along the trail detected the advance too late. Believing they themselves were the objective, they withdrew to higher ground. The Persians ignored them and continued toward the rear of Leonidas's army. Just before dawn, exhausted messengers reached the Greek camp. Leonidas listened in silence as the reports arrived. The enemy had not broken through the front. They had gone around it. The battle for Thermopylae was over. What remained was a choice that would echo across history. Before sunrise, the terrible truth reached the Greek camp. The Persians had discovered the mountain path. By morning, the defenders would be surrounded. Leonidas gathered the allied commanders. The decision was swift. Most of the Greek army would withdraw. This was not surrender, it was survival. Those soldiers would fight again at Salamis and Plataea, where the fate of Greece would ultimately be decided. But someone had to remain. Someone had to delay the Persian advance long enough for the retreat to succeed. Leonidas stayed. His 300 Spartans stayed. And then came one of history's most remarkable acts of courage. The 700 men of Thespiae were free to leave. Instead, they chose to remain. No law compelled them. No king forced them. They knowingly accepted almost certain death beside the Spartans. The Helots remained as well. Though history preserved few of their names, they too would share the fate of the warriors they had marched beside. More than 1,000 defenders stood ready, not to win, but to buy time with their lives. The final battle began as Persian forces appeared from both front and rear. The trap had closed. Escape was impossible. Leonidas ordered one last charge. The disciplined formations that had held for 2 days dissolved into desperate combat. Spears splintered, shields cracked. Men fought shoulder to shoulder in a struggle for every step of ground. Somewhere amid the fighting, Leonidas fell. Herodotus records that the Greeks launched repeated attacks simply to recover the body of their king, refusing to leave him in Persian hands. Eventually, the survivors withdrew to a small hill. There they made their final stand. Broken spears gave way to swords. Broken swords gave way to knives. When even those failed, the battle continued with bare hands and unwavering determination. At last, Xerxes ended the slaughter. Rather than sacrifice more soldiers, he ordered his archers forward. Thousands of arrows filled the sky and rained upon the defenders. When the arrows stopped, silence settled over Thermopylae. Leonidas was dead. The Spartans who had remained were gone. The Thespians had fallen beside them. Countless unnamed Helots lay among the dead. The battle was over. The legend had only just begun. History is not just a record of what happened. It is also a record of what people chose to remember. For centuries, Thermopylae became the story of 300 Spartans. Their courage deserved admiration, but the legend slowly eclipsed everyone who stood beside them. The 700 Thespians, who voluntarily remained to face certain death, faded from popular memory. The Corinthians, Arcadians, Phocians, and countless other allies became little more than names in ancient texts. Even the Helots who marched and fought beside the Spartans were rarely acknowledged. The number 300 was simple. The truth was far richer. The Persians captured the pass, but their victory came at a cost. The stand at Thermopylae delayed the invasion and strengthened the resolve of the Greek alliance. Weeks later, the Greek fleet shattered Persian naval power at Salamis. The following year, the combined armies of Greece defeated Xerxes' remaining forces at Plataea, bringing the invasion to an end. Thermopylae did not win the war. It bought the time needed for others to win it. Perhaps that is why the battle still inspires people more than 2,000 years later. It reminds us that history is shaped not only by victory, but also by sacrifice. Leonidas deserves to be remembered. So do the 300 Spartans, but so do the 700 Thespians, the allied Greeks, the unnamed Helots, the countless men whose courage never found its way into legend. History remembered 300. Today we remember them all. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy documentaries that separate historical myth from historical reality, consider subscribing. There are many more forgotten stories waiting to be told.